Well, good Monday morning, everyone. Hey, this week I want to talk to you about the most important week in the history of the world. That's right. I mean, since the dawn of time, there has been some pretty incredible moments in the history of the world. I mean, when God literally created everything that we have, the heavens and the earth and the sea and the fish and everything all around us, well, that was a pretty incredible week, right? I mean, when Tiger won Masters again, since 2008, that's a pretty incredible week. But there's one that really trumps all of that. It's the last week of Jesus' life that the Bible covers. Before Jesus is resurrected, there's this last week of his life that is the absolute, hands down, most important week in the history of the world. In fact, most of what we know about Jesus, well, it comes from the last week of his life. Do you realize that? I mean, there's a lot that we can learn that the Bible tells us about who Jesus is just based on the last week of his life. And so this last week, well, in the church, we traditionally call this Holy Week. And some of you may have started celebrating that yesterday with what's called Palm Sunday. And so today, I want to just spend a few moments and kind of just looking at Palm Sunday and asking a few questions. I mean, what is it? I mean, why is it important, and how does it, direct what I do now, right? That was 2,000 years ago. Why do we celebrate it today? Well, those are all good questions that I want to help answer this morning. And so to do that, we're going to go to Matthew chapter 21, and we're going to read Matthew's take on Palm Sunday, or what some people call the triumphal entry. And so here's what Matthew says happened on the Sunday before Easter. In verse 1, it says, "Now when they drew near," that's the disciples and Jesus, "to Jerusalem, and came to Bethphage," that's just a stone's throw outside of Jerusalem, "to the Mount of Olives, then Jesus sent 2 disciples." We don't know necessarily which 2, he just sent 2 disciples, saying to them, all right, here are their instructions: "Go into the village in front of you, and immediately you will find a donkey tied there, and a colt with her. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, you shall say, 'The Lord needs them,' and he will send them at once." This took place to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet, saying, "Say to the daughter of Zion, Behold, your king is coming to you, humble and mounted on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a beast of burden." Well, the disciples went and did as Jesus had directed them. They brought the donkey and the colt and put on them their cloaks, and he sat on them. Most of the crowd spread their cloaks on the road, and others cut branches from the trees and spread them on the road. And the crowds that went before him and that followed him were shouting, "Hosanna to the Son of David! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord! Hosanna in the highest!" And we had entered Jerusalem. The whole city was stirred up, saying, "Who is this?" And the crowd said, "This is the prophet Jesus from Nazareth of Galilee." So this is a pretty crazy moment in Jesus' life. For most of Jesus' ministry of the 3 years, he's been kind of out in the hill country of Galilee and around the Sea of Galilee and things like. He's not wanting a ton of crowds and stuff, and definitely not trying to make a huge commotion. But here, he's actually setting all of this up. I mean, think about it. Jesus is in control of all of this. Jesus tells the disciples, he says, "Hey, I want you to go into this village in front of you, and there you're going to find a colt or a donkey with a colt. And then I want you to tie that, and then when the person asks you why are you doing that, you tell them that the Lord needs them." Well, that all happened. Jesus had set all of this up. He is the Lord, no doubt. He is in control of all of this. So why does he need this colt, right? Why is he coming into Jerusalem? Why is this important for us today? Well, he needs the colt, number one, to fulfill the prophecy that is about him. And the prophecy is in verse 5, where Matthew is stating the prophecy. "Behold, your king is coming to you, humble and mounted on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a beast of burden." So this prophecy comes from Zechariah 9:9. Now, if you were to go back in the Old Testament, this happens several hundred years before Jesus comes onto the scene. Zechariah prophesies in verse 9. Matthew is almost quoting Zechariah here. And Zechariah the prophet is telling Israel that your king is going to come, and he's going to come on a donkey. Now, why in the world would Jesus or God's Messiah come into Jerusalem on a donkey? I thought only, kings, if he's declaring himself king, I thought kings rode horses, right? A big stallion, a big war horse. Well, they did, if they were riding into the town to declare war. But that's not what Jesus is doing, is it? In fact, in the ancient Middle Eastern times, even in the Bible, there's 4 or 5 instances of this, is that the king who was coming to declare peace into a town would not ride a war horse, but would ride a donkey. And so Jesus here is fulfilling this prophecy because of one very specific point. He's coming into Jerusalem to not declare war, but to declare peace. And as all these people are around him, his disciples are in front of him, and they're behind him. They're laying palm branches down that were for royalty, and they're shouting parts of psalms that say, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in. They're saying, save us, O King, save us, O King. And so this is all that's happening there. Now, this is a festive time. But there's a few things we need to remember that sometimes we kind of get confused about when it comes to Holy Week. This crowd that's there on Sunday, this Sunday, Palm Sunday, is not the crowd that is calling and crying, crucify him on Friday. These are not the same crowds. Just read the story. If you don't believe me, that's okay if you don't. But just read the story. This is not the same crowd. These are disciples on Sunday. The crowd on Friday, that's Jesus' enemies. These are not the same people. And so Jesus, though, here, knowing of what's going to take place later, knowing the message that he wants to get out, he comes into Jerusalem, allowing, in a way, this worship to take place for one specific purpose. Because he's declaring that he is bringing peace. Now, how does Jesus bring peace? I thought if we want peace, then we have to be stronger than the next person. If we want peace because there's conflict, then I need to overcome the conflict. I need to be bigger, stronger, faster, hit harder. Well, that's not Jesus' way of doing things. He comes on a humble donkey to declare peace. So what is Jesus saying? Well, Jesus knows the number one reason of why he is coming into Jerusalem, the way he is going to declare peace, is that he rides into Jerusalem for one purpose. That is to die on the cross. You see, Paul tells us in one of his letters is that it is through his cross, Jesus' cross, that we have peace with God. And in fact, 2 Corinthians chapter 5, he says we've been reconciled to God. We've been made right to God. How? Because of Jesus' death on the cross. I mean, Paul tells us that also in Philippians 2, that he became obedient. He humbled himself, and he became obedient unto death, even death on a cross. See, the way Jesus is going to overcome the spiritual conflict, the sin that has been piled up since the Garden of Genesis 3, is that he's not going to overcome it by force. He's not going to kick Rome out of Jerusalem. He's not going to be a military a warrior and militant kind of person. He's actually going to go and die for sinful, rebellious people. The innocent God-man is going to go to a cross and trade places with us. And because of his obedience on that cross, we now can have peace with God. So think about in your life, what's going on? Where do you have conflict? Where is it that you're in struggle? What oppressions are you dealing with? Maybe it's family, maybe it's addictions, maybe it's the job, maybe it's whatever other kind of pressures. What are you going to do about it? You can either keep fighting, keep working harder, keep pushing forward in all of your might and all of your strength, or you can go to the cross. You can go to the cross and rest in Jesus' finished work for you. He is the King of peace. Well, I hope this beginning of Holy Week will help you think through this week that life is not meant to be lived in conflict. Jesus brings peace. And I hope He will do that with you this week. Have an awesome, a safe, and a productive and peaceful week.